Welcome to Twisted Truths, where betrayal meets brutal payback, and where the most unexpected twists expose what people are really capable of. This story isn't just shocking, it's personal. My name is Raymond. I'm 59 years old, and for nearly 2 decades, I was the operations director at Halliburton Dynamics, a once proud industrial manufacturing company rooted in the Midwest. Not flashy, not famous, but essential. We built the parts that kept half the regional infrastructure running: compressors, turbine parts, high-tolerance gears. We were small enough to feel like family, large enough to carry weight in the industry. And I was the backbone of that company. I didn't wear tailored suits or deliver TED Talks. I wore steel-toe boots and carried a clipboard. I knew every floor manager by name. Trained most of them. I'd held this place together through recessions, labor shortages, raw material crises, and even the founder's heart attack. His name was Calvin Halliburton, a man I respected like a second father. He'd built Halliburton Dynamics with his bare hands and a single lathe in his garage in 1977. When his health began declining, he pulled me aside and said, "Ray, I trust you more than I trust my own kid with this place." Turns out he should have gone with his gut. Because 2 months after Calvin passed, his daughter Melanie took over and fired me. Not with dignity. Not even with respect. She walked into my office in her designer heels, flipped her platinum blonde hair like this was a damn fashion show, and said, "We're moving into a younger, more agile direction. You're no longer part of the vision." Just like that. 21 years of loyalty, gone. I kept calm. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I gathered my things in silence, while a few younger staff, the ones I'd mentored, avoided my eyes. Shame written all over their faces. I could tell most of them wanted to say something, but Melanie had made it clear, this was her reign now. Anyone who challenged her was next. And just like that, I was out. I placed my box in the passenger seat of my old F-150, sat there gripping the wheel, and smiled. Because Melanie Halliburton had no idea what she'd just done. She hadn't read the contract. Not carefully, at least. You'd think getting fired would trigger rage. Or panic. Maybe even relief. But what I felt sitting in that parking lot with my life's work packed into a cardboard box was grief. Real grief. Like someone had died. Maybe someone had me. Or the man I'd spent the last 21 years becoming. I drove home in silence, the streets of Westfield, Indiana blurring past the windows. The same route I'd taken every day at 5:30 p.m. for decades. But this time, I didn't have a job to return to the next morning. My house felt too quiet. Too still. My wife, Marianne, passed 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. Took her in under 8 months. She never got to see retirement, or the trip to Scotland she'd always wanted to take. I kept everything in the house the same: her mugs, her slippers, even the old grocery list pad on the fridge with her handwriting still on it. I told myself it was for comfort. Now I knew the truth. It was because she'd been the only anchor I had. I sat at the kitchen table, stared at my severance contract. My hand trembled as I poured a glass of scotch. Not because I was angry. Not even because I was scared. But because, for the first time in decades, I didn't know what the hell came next. Who hires a 59-year-old operations director in this market? Melanie knew what she was doing. She dressed it up with buzzwords: agility, streamlining, future-focused. But really? She wanted yes men. People who wouldn't question her disastrous ideas, who'd smile and nod as she turned a working system into a branding experiment. I wasn't part of that vision because I knew how to say no. And that made me dangerous. That night I didn't sleep. I sat on the porch in the dark with Marianne's old shawl over my shoulders and watched the wind dance through the maple tree we planted together the year after our son Ethan was born. He was in Seattle now, a software engineer. Our daughter, Claire, taught kindergarten in Louisville. Both called often. Both offered to fly in when I told them what happened. But I told them no. Because I was still trying to convince myself I was okay. I wasn't. I started losing time. Whole days where I'd stare at the wall and wonder if I'd wasted it all. If 21 years of loyalty had been some kind of joke. If Calvin had made a mistake betting on me. The day after my firing, I opened LinkedIn. Mistake. I saw a post Melanie had shared. So proud to usher in a bold new era at Halliburton Dynamics. Innovation can't thrive in the shadows of the past. The comments were full of fire emojis and congratulatory fluff from people who didn't have a damn clue what it took to run an industrial floor. That night, I nearly deleted my account. But then something made me pause. I opened my contract again. Section 14. Subsection D. Severance protection. 24 months of salary if terminated without documented cause. And she hadn't documented anything. Not one write-up. Not a single complaint. My annual performance reviews were spotless. Calvin himself had signed the last one with the note, "You're the only reason I sleep at night." That clause wasn't just boilerplate. It was real. And binding. I picked up the phone and called Barry Stein, an old friend of mine who ran a boutique law firm downtown. "I need to sue my old company," I said. "You mean the one you practically built?" Barry asked. "That's the one." He didn't hesitate. "Come in Monday. Bring your contract." "And Raymond?" "Yeah. This time we go for blood." Still, even as that tiny ember of vengeance sparked to life, the night stayed cold. I missed waking up at 4:45. Missed walking the floor with a coffee in hand, chatting with operators about small fixes and tight tolerances. Missed feeling necessary. The world doesn't care much for old men who still use clipboards. And that's when despair turned into something else. Resolve. I walked into Barry Stein's office on a rainy Monday morning with a folder of documents and a chip on my shoulder the size of Indiana. He barely glanced up before saying, "You look like hell." "Sleep's overrated," I said, handing him the folder. "Here's my contract. Pay attention to Section 14, subsection D." He skimmed and I watched his eyes widen. "You're kidding me," he muttered. "Nope. 2 years' salary guaranteed if terminated without documented cause." "Did she give you anything in writing?" "Not a thing. Just, we're moving in a new direction." Barry smiled like a wolf. "This is airtight. Either they cut you a check, or we drag them through court and drag her name through the press." "Make her bleed," I said, maybe too coldly. But Barry didn't flinch. "She will." He got to work immediately. Sent a certified letter to Halliburton Dynamics' legal team that same afternoon. Demand for severance per contractual agreement, plus damages for age-based discrimination if they fought it. 2 days later he got a call. It wasn't from their lawyer. It was from Melanie. She sounded panicked. Wanted to talk. Barry declined. "Put it in writing," he told her, "or we file." It should have ended there. But then, I got curious. See, Melanie had mentioned during my firing that she wanted to bring Halliburton into the digital age. She talked about automation, cost-cutting, and removing outdated systems. It sounded like buzzword soup, but something didn't sit right. So I called Tom Adler, our former senior engineer. He'd been let go 2 weeks before me, quietly, no explanation. "You been watching the financial reports?" he asked, skipping pleasantries. "No. She's been selling off the custom tooling systems. Liquidating specialized machinery, some of it brand new. Stuff we spent 3 years developing." "Why would she do that?" I asked, stomach twisting. "To get fast capital," he said. "I heard from someone in procurement that she's been diverting funds, using them to buy property. In Miami." I blinked. "She's turning Halliburton into a piggy bank. Worse, she's gutting it, cutting the core people, selling the specialized equipment, outsourcing production to sweatshops overseas. The place is falling apart." And just like that, everything clicked. Melanie wasn't just trying to modernize. She was trying to cash out. I opened my files at home and dug out the old strategic plans Calvin and I had drawn up. There, underlined and highlighted, was a note in his handwriting. "The future is in small batch custom hydraulics. Protect that division at all costs." Melanie was killing it. And with it, his legacy. The next day, I got an anonymous message from someone still inside the company. It was Jennifer Rausch, our former head of quality control. She was one of the few older employees still left, probably because her retirement package hadn't fully vested. She sent me internal memos, production logs, and procurement changes, all showing a disturbing trend. Missed deadlines, lowered quality standards, outsourced parts from unreliable vendors. Then came the bombshell. A scanned copy of a corporate memo from Melanie to the board. "We can increase short-term profitability by liquidating legacy equipment and rebranding as a software-forward logistics firm. There is no long-term future in manufacturing." I sat back stunned. Halliburton Dynamics wasn't just being revamped. It was being dismantled. And the worst part? The board didn't know. Calvin's board, his hand-picked executives, trusted Melanie. They believed she was continuing his mission. They had no idea she was preparing to sell the company off piece by piece, cash out and disappear. This wasn't just about firing me. It was about betrayal. Of a legacy. Of hundreds of workers. Of Calvin's memory. That night, I stood in front of the mirror and stared at myself. "I'm not going to let her get away with this," I whispered. "Not for Calvin. Not for the employees. And not for me." The next morning, I drove across town to meet someone I hadn't spoken to in over 5 years. Douglas Wren, a semi-retired industrial investor who once offered to back a side venture I didn't have the guts, or the time, to pursue. We met at a quiet breakfast joint off Route 31. Douglas was already there, a stack of papers in front of him, still wearing the same pressed khakis and button-downs he always did when talking money. "Raymond Eckhart," he said with a smile. "When I saw your name on the caller ID, I knew something serious had happened." "It's more than serious," I replied. "It's sabotage." He listened as I laid it all out. The firing, the severance clause, the internal collapse of Hallburton, and the treasure trove of evidence Jennifer had sent me. When I was done, he leaned back and whistled. "She's bleeding the company dry. And no one sees it yet. You planning to warn the board?" "Eventually," I said. "But not before I have leverage." Douglas raised an eyebrow. "What are you thinking?" "I want to start over," I said. "Smaller, smarter. Focused entirely on custom hydraulic components." His eyes lit up. "You mean the work Hallburton's abandoning?" "Exactly. The one thing Calvin always believed was the future." Douglas leaned forward. "If you're serious, I'll fund it. Not as a favor, this could be profitable. But I want full transparency and operational control, at least until it's stable." I nodded. "That's more than fair." He reached across the table and shook my hand. "Let's build something better." Two weeks later, I signed paperwork for a lease on a modest warehouse on the east side of town. Clean, underutilized, and just the right size for a team of 10. And I knew exactly who I'd recruit. Thomas Adler was the first. Engineering genius, fired without warning. He didn't even hesitate. "You've got guts, Ray. Count me in." Then came Jason Wright, our former CNC specialist, brilliant with complex machine code. Melanie had slashed his department's budget, and he quit on principle. Jennifer agreed to consult off the books. She was still employed at Hallburton but made it clear she wanted out the second her pension was secure. Soon we had a skeleton crew of Hallburton's best and brightest, the ones Melanie had tossed aside. I named the company Cornerstone Precision. Because what Melanie called outdated experience, I called foundation. Douglas funded the equipment. I mapped the process. Thomas refined the product line. Jason started rebuilding the proprietary programming systems from scratch. It wasn't flashy. Not yet. But it was real. And then, I reached out to a handful of Hallburton's longtime clients. Not to poach. Just to let them know we were starting a new venture. The moment they heard the words custom, domestic, high tolerance, they perked up. Especially since Melanie had started outsourcing to cheap vendors overseas and missing deadlines. I didn't push. I didn't sell. I just let the silence do the work. Meanwhile, Barry was hammering Hallburton's legal team. They tried to lowball me. 6 months of severance. Barry laughed in their face. 24 months or we go public. The threat of discovery, deposing senior staff, digging through Melanie's finances, rattled them. But it wasn't just the severance I wanted anymore. It was a seat at the table. Because if what Jennifer said was true, and Melanie was truly liquidating key assets under the board's nose, there might be a way back in. Not just to collect a check, but to take back the entire company. That's when Jennifer called one night in a whisper. "She's selling the prototype machines," she said. "The high-end ones Calvin had imported from Germany." My blood ran cold. "They're not even depreciated yet," I said. "She doesn't care. She's listing them as redundant assets. Shipping them to auction." I copied the serial numbers. That was it. That was the crack in the dam. I passed the info to Barry, who pulled sales records and cross-referenced the inventory logs. Turns out, Melanie had created a separate LLC, Golden Line Partners, and was using it to buy Hallburton's equipment at auction-level prices, then flipping it at market value to firms in Florida. She wasn't just incompetent. She was running a shell scheme. A felony. Barry looked at me over his reading glasses and said, "How poetic do you want this justice to be?" I smiled for the first time in weeks. Very. The first domino fell on a quiet Thursday morning. Barry had submitted a formal complaint to the Indiana Business Oversight Board, attaching every file, invoice and transaction Jennifer helped us gather. The serial numbers on the auction machines, Melanie's Shell LLC, Golden Line Partners, and the gross undervaluation of Halliburton's core equipment. We didn't go public. Not yet. Because the real plan wasn't to destroy Halliburton. It was to take it back. And for that, I needed the board to see what Melanie really was. So I reached out to Calvin Halliburton's old lawyer, Ezra Levine, an old-school corporate hawk with a face like a stone carving and a memory sharper than most men half his age. Raymond, he said after I laid everything out, Calvin told me before he passed, if my daughter ever strays from the company's values, Raymond will know what to do. He leaned back. You're doing it. Then came the strategy. Ezra dug into Halliburton's shareholder records. And there it was, buried deep in the documentation. Calvin had retained 51% voting rights in the company at the time of his death. Not ownership, just control. Because Calvin had always worried Melanie would act emotionally, not rationally. He had placed those rights in a holding trust that would activate if Melanie ever made decisions that put the company at legal or financial risk. And guess who the trust's legal trigger was? Me. Raymond Eckhart. I nearly dropped the damn phone. You mean to tell me I still have power? Ezra chuckled. Not directly. But if you can prove her misconduct, and show that it threatens the company's survival, I can call a board meeting and trigger an emergency leadership review. And then? If the board votes yes, we remove her. It was time to move. I met Jennifer in a parking lot at night, just like something out of a spy film. She handed me the final piece, a copy of an internal report Melanie had buried. 3 major clients had already canceled contracts due to late deliveries, faulty parts, and unprofessional communication. The projected loss for Q2? Over $3.4 million. That report had never made it to the board. And when I shared it with Ezra, he didn't hesitate. It's time. One week later, the Halliburton board gathered in a sleek downtown office. I sat at the far end of the table, silent while Melanie gave her usual presentation, deflecting every negative figure with buzzwords and fake optimism. Until Ezra stood. As counsel to the Halliburton Holding Trust, I am here to invoke Clause 17B, a leadership reassessment. Melanie's smile faltered. What are you talking about? Ezra placed the documents down. The trust retains voting control. And per your contract, any leader found to be engaging in activity that jeopardizes the company may be removed. This is absurd. I stood. It's not. You've sold equipment below value, falsified financial forecasts, and misrepresented vendor relationships. We have the proof. The room went still. The youngest board member, a sharp woman named Lila Dorsey, looked at Melanie and asked, "Is this true?" Melanie stammered, then tried to spin it. It was part of a strategic restructuring. Ezra cut in. Under the alias Golden Line Partners? Melanie's face drained of all color. That was it. The vote was called. 5-2. Melanie Halliburton was removed as CEO of Halliburton Dynamics. And just like that, the company was leaderless. But I wasn't done yet. It I leaned forward and slid a folder across the table. This, I said, is a proposal for merging Halliburton's remaining assets into Cornerstone Precision. Murmurs filled the room. We've already retained several of your former top engineers. Your clients are already approaching us. We can preserve what Calvin built, but only if we act fast. And then I laid out the numbers. Projected revenue. New contracts already in motion. Skilled teams. Restored integrity. It wasn't a hostile takeover. It was a lifeline. Ezra folded his hands. Ladies and gentlemen, we can bleed out, or we can rebuild. After a tense 20 minutes of deliberation, the board returned. And this time? Unanimous. Cornerstone Precision would absorb Halliburton Dynamics. Under my leadership. The ink had barely dried on the merger when I got the message. From Melanie Halliburton. Subject, let's talk. I'll see you soon. This isn't over. I almost laughed. Not because I wasn't taking her seriously, because I was. Melanie was cornered, exposed, and ousted. And that made her dangerous. But what she didn't know. I'd already seen her next move coming. The following week, I was in the newly combined Cornerstone Hallburton facility. Thomas was walking the engineers through some new CNC schematics. Jason was onboarding 2 programmers from a former client. And Jennifer, finally retired, was now a part-time quality consultant. The place felt alive again. Then the security call came in. "She just walked through the front door," said the guard. "Demanding a meeting. With you." I nodded. "Let her in." She strutted in like she still owned the place. Heels clicking against polished concrete, fury in her eyes. "This is still my family's company," she hissed. "No, Melanie," I said. "This was your father's company. And you nearly buried it. You manipulated the board." I showed them the truth. She slapped a folder onto the desk. "A cease and desist. You poached employees under contract. That's actionable." I opened the folder. "Read the page." Then smiled. Jennifer's contract expired. Jason quit. Thomas was wrongfully terminated and had no non-compete. "You have nothing." Melanie's face flushed. "Fine," she said, shaking. "Then I'll go public. I'll tell everyone this was a coup. That you tricked my father." "Your father wrote the clause that removed you," I said calmly. "He gave me the power to protect the company from you." She went still. Just for a second. And then the twist came. "You think this is about business?" she said, voice softening. "You're playing a game of honor. But I've been playing war." She pulled out her phone. "I've already spoken to 3 of your key vendors. Told them we're suing. Said you're unstable. That you fabricated documents to force me out." My stomach tensed. "They'll never believe you." "They don't have to," she smirked. "They just need to be afraid. That's how you kill a company from the inside." She turned to leave. But I stopped her. "Melanie," I said. "Did you really think I wouldn't prepare for this?" She froze. "Last week I spoke with every vendor you called. I showed them the court filings, the investigation paperwork, and your LLC records. I opened my desk drawer and dropped in front of her a letter. From her own lawyer. Advising her to settle. To walk away quietly. Before criminal charges for fraud and breach of fiduciary duty were filed." Her smirk vanished. "Every vendor you tried to scare is now under contract with Cornerstone," I continued. "And you? You've lost your credibility." She reached for the letter with trembling hands. "And if you push this," I added, "I'll go public with everything. The shell company. The property deals in Miami. The $3 million in unreported equipment sales." Silence. She lowered herself into the chair like the weight of it all had just hit her. "You don't understand," she whispered. "My father always compared me to you." I said nothing. I just wanted to prove I was better. I leaned forward. "You didn't have to be better, Melanie. You just had to be honest." Tears filled her eyes. "I never meant to ruin it." "But you did," I said softly. "And now we're going to fix it without you." She stood slowly without another word. And walked out. For good. 6 months after Melanie walked out of Cornerstone Precision for the last time, the company felt whole. The production floor was alive again. The hum of machines. The rhythm of engineers moving with purpose. The quiet buzz of innovation and experience working side by side. It was like a symphony. One I'd forgotten how much I missed. We were no longer just surviving. We were thriving. 3 of Hallburton's former biggest clients, who had all dropped contracts under Melanie, were now back with us. We didn't undercut on price. We didn't make big promises. We just delivered the quality and precision they remembered. And we brought something new too. Respect. I watched Jennifer walk into the lab one morning, wearing her lab coat like a badge of honor. She nodded to Jason, who was guiding a young hire through a programming sequence. Thomas waved from the engineering bay, where a team was assembling a new prototype for aerospace hydraulics. This wasn't just a company anymore. It was a resurrection. Then came the letter. Typed on real stationery, hand-signed. "Dear Raymond, thank you. Not just for saving what my father built, but for showing me the consequences of arrogance. I'm in Miami now trying to start over. Not in business, at least not yet. For now, I'm volunteering at a startup accelerator. Listening instead of leading. Maybe it's not too late to learn what you and my father already knew. Real legacy isn't built on control. It's built on character. Melanie." I stared at the letter for a long time. Did I forgive her? Not fully. But I respected the honesty. That was a start. And maybe, so was she. Three months after that, we held a memorial event for Calvin Hallburton at the newly renovated facility. His portrait hung above the main floor entrance. Beneath it, a plaque read, "Built by hands, preserved by heart. Calvin Hallburton, founder, visionary, friend." I spoke to the team, over 80 people now, and said the words I never got to say before. I didn't come back to destroy what Melanie tried to build. I came back to restore what Calvin never stopped believing in, all of us. Applause. Some tears. Even laughter. Justice didn't always look like a courtroom or a final showdown. Sometimes justice was a second chance. A louder voice for those who'd been silenced. And a better future for those still showing up every day just trying to do things right. A year later, we were featured in Industrial Leadership Monthly for our innovative approach to combining old-school expertise with modern precision tech. The headline read, "Cornerstone Precision Rewrites the Future, with Experience at its Core." I sent a copy to Ethan and Claire. My son texted back, "Told you you're not done." My daughter called and cried. And I just stood at the window of the corner office, my office again, and watched the next generation walk the floor we'd rebuilt from the ground up. In the end, truth has a way of surfacing, even if it comes twisted through pain and betrayal. As one wise voice once said, sometimes your greatest enemy was once your closest ally. If this story struck a chord with you, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, share, and spread the word, because justice deserves to be heard.